Hi there. Welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight we're standing at the base of an impossible tree that stretches through 9 worlds, where 3 ancient women sit beside a well that holds the reflection of everything that ever was or will be. You can almost hear the soft splash of water as they dip their wooden ladles, the whisper of thread being spun, and let's be honest, if you actually stumbled upon these particular ladies in real life, you probably wouldn't survive long enough to post about it on social media. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, close your eyes and listen. You're approaching the very roots of existence itself, where reality gets weird in ways that would make quantum physicists nervous. The ground beneath your feet isn't exactly ground anymore. It's something older, more fundamental, like the concept of down made solid. Above you, the world tree. Yggdrasil rises so high that its crown disappears into dimensions your eyes can't process. But you're not here for the tree, impressive as it is. You're here for the women who sit at its base, and trust me, they've been expecting you. The air smells of deep water and old wool, tinged with something you can't quite place. Maybe it's the scent of time itself. As you draw closer, you see them. 3 figures hunched over their work, fingers moving with practiced precision. They don't look up as you approach. They don't need to. They knew you'd be here at this exact moment, reading these exact words, probably procrastinating something important. That's the thing about the Norns, the 3 goddesses of fate in Norse mythology. They're not just characters in old stories. According to Viking belief, they're the ones writing your story right now. The eldest sits closest to the well, her hair the color of tarnished silver. That's Erd, whose name literally means that which has become. She's the keeper of everything that's already happened, every choice you've made, every embarrassing thing you did in middle school. She occasionally chuckles to herself, probably remembering that time you thought you could pull off that haircut. Next to her, Verdandi works with steady hands, her attention fixed on the present moment, this exact second as you process these words. Her name means becoming, and she's the reason this moment exists at all. The youngest, Skuld, sits slightly apart, her face hidden beneath a deep hood. That which shall be is her domain, and historians still argue whether she can see the future clearly or if she's just really good at educated guesses based on her sister's work. The well beside them isn't just any well. This is Brunna, the well of fate, and its waters contain something more potent than any energy drink. One sip would show you the connections between all things, the threads that bind every action to its consequence. The gods themselves come here for wisdom, though the Norns make them pay dearly for it. Even Odin, the All-Father, sacrificed an eye for just a taste of this knowledge. You probably shouldn't ask what the exchange rate is for mortals. The 3 sisters don't acknowledge your presence, but Verdandi's lips quirk in what might be amusement as she pulls a fresh thread from the vast cosmic mass of raw potential beside her. This thread, thin as spider's silk, but somehow containing the weight of a life, gleams with possibilities. You watch as she passes it to Erd, who dips it in the well's ancient waters. The thread darkens, taking on the patina of experience, of choices made and paths taken. This is how it works. Every thread is a life, and these 3 women handle billions of them with the casual efficiency of a cosmic DMV. Skuld reaches for the thread next, and here's where things get interesting. Unlike her sisters, She doesn't always weave the thread into the great tapestry immediately. Sometimes she holds it, running it through her fingers like she's reading Braille, her hidden face tilted in concentration. Historians still argue whether she's determining the thread's future or simply reading what's already encoded in its fibers. The Vikings themselves couldn't agree. Some said Skuld could change fate. Others insisted she merely revealed what was always meant to be. It's the kind of theological debate that probably started a few bar fights in medieval Scandinavia. You notice that each sister has her own tools. Urd works with a bone needle that looks suspiciously like it came from something that had opinions about being turned into crafting supplies. Verdandi uses her bare hands, sensitive to every vibration in the threads she handles. Skuld has shears, silver ones that catch light that doesn't seem to come from anywhere. Every so often, she lifts them, and you realize with a chill that she's not cutting thread. She's cutting time itself, determining the exact moment when a life story ends. The sound they make isn't quite a snip. It's more like the universe briefly holding its breath. The really mind-bending part is that these aren't just metaphorical threads. In Norse cosmology, the Norns are literally weaving reality. Every moment you experience is a section of tapestry they've created. That weird coincidence where you ran into your ex at the exact coffee shop where you met. The Norns. That time you randomly decided to take a different route home and avoided a massive traffic jam. Also the Norns. That inexplicable urge to check your phone right before an important call comes in. You get the idea. They're basically cosmic puppet masters, except the strings are attached to literally everything. But here's the quirky detail most people miss. The threads fight back. You watch as Verdandi struggles with a particularly unruly strand that keeps trying to tangle itself with others. It sparks and writhes, resisting her attempts to weave it smoothly into the pattern. She mutters something in Old Norse that probably translates to the kind of language that would get this video demonetized. This is someone's life being difficult. Someone right now probably insisting on texting their ex at 2 a.m., despite all cosmic interventions suggesting otherwise. Free will, it turns out, is that annoying thread that won't lay flat no matter how much divine fabric softener you use. The sisters work in perfect synchronization, yet each has her own rhythm. Urd moves with the patience of geological time, each stitch deliberate and final. Verdandi's hands blur with speed, keeping pace with the relentless present. Skuld works in bursts, long periods of stillness followed by sudden, decisive action. Together, they create something that makes the bio tapestry look like a kindergarten craft project. This is the web of weird, the pattern of fate that connects everything to everything else. And yes, weird is where we get the word weird, because the Vikings understood that fate is fundamentally strange. Baby. The well of fate beside them isn't just sitting there looking mystical. It's actively bubbling with what can only be described as liquid causality. You lean closer, and the surface shows not your reflection, but your connections. Silver threads spiraling out from where you'd be standing, connecting you to every person you've ever met, every choice you've ever made, every consequence rippling outward like cosmic sonar. The water is clearer than Arctic ice, yet somehow also deep as a black hole. One medieval text describes it as water that remembers, which sounds poetic until you realize it means the well contains the memory of literally everything. Urd occasionally scoops water with a ladle made from what looks like crystallized starlight. The Vikings were metal about everything, including their serving utensils. She pours it over certain threads, and you watch them shimmer and strengthen. This is how the past gains power, through repetition, through remembering, through the Norns literally watering history to keep it alive. Sometimes she'll pause over a thread, hold it up to the strange non-light that suffuses this place, and make a small adjustment. That's probably why your grandmother's story about walking to school uphill both ways keeps getting more elaborate each time it's told. The well itself defies physics in deeply uncomfortable ways. It's simultaneously a single point, an infinite space. You could drop a stone and never hear it hit bottom. Yet Verdandi can reach in elbow deep to retrieve specific threads. The water level never changes despite constant use. And here's the unsettling part. Sometimes things reach back. Not in a horror movie way. More like the well occasionally offers things the Norns didn't specifically request. A thread that glows differently. A pattern that suggests itself. A possibility nobody ordered. Historians still argue whether the well has its own agenda, or if it's just reflecting some deeper layer of fate even the Norns can't fully control. You notice the ground around the well is worn smooth by eons of divine traffic. The gods come here regularly, though come might be the wrong word. It's more like they're drawn here, pulled by the same threads the Norns weave. Even Odin, Mr. I know everything himself, shows up to consult with the sisters. The price for wisdom from the well of fate varies. Sometimes it's an eye, sometimes it's a son. Sometimes it's just the acknowledgement that no matter how much power you have, 3 women with wool and water have more. That probably stings worse than losing body parts. The water has other properties too. It preserves things, not just physically, but conceptually. The Norns use it to maintain the cosmic order, literally watering the roots of Yggdrasil to keep the world tree healthy. Without this daily maintenance, reality would start getting plot holes worse than a rushed TV series finale. The well water ensures continuity, makes sure cause leads to effect, keeps the narrative of existence from completely falling apart. It's basically the universe's version of a really aggressive copy editor. But here's the weird detail that Viking skulls love to mention. The well makes noise, not splashing or gurgling, but something like whispers in languages that haven't been invented yet. If you listen carefully, which, pro tip, don't, you can almost make out words, future words, past words, words that exist in the subjunctive mood of never was and might have been. Verdandi occasionally pauses in her work to cock her head and listen, then adjusts her weaving accordingly. She's taking editorial notes from the well itself, which raises the uncomfortable question of who exactly is writing this story. The well's edge is carved with runes that hurt to look at directly, not because they're magical, but because they're true, in a way your brain isn't equipped to process. They spell out the fundamental laws of cause and effect, the basic physics of fate. One scholar who claimed to have translated them said they basically amount to what goes around comes around, but with more math. Verdandi's fingers move like a concert pianist performing a piece that's been rehearsed since the beginning of time. She takes a fresh thread, yours, actually, the one representing this exact moment, and begins working it into the grand pattern. The weaving isn't what you'd expect from your grandmother's knitting circle. These threads phase in and out of visible reality, sometimes appearing solid as rope, other times fading to suggestions of possibility. She has to weave not just in 3 dimensions, but in several others that don't have names yet. The loom itself deserves mention, because calling it a loom is like calling the Pacific a puddle. It exists in a state of constant flux, expanding and contracting to accommodate the ever-growing tapestry of reality. The frame appears to be made from Yggdrasil's roots, still alive and occasionally sprouting tiny leaves that Skuld absently plucks and eats. They apparently taste like tomorrow, with hints of regret. The warp threads are strung with starlight. Literal starlight that the Norns collected before those particular stars were born. The whole setup makes CERN look like a high school science project. You watch as Verdandi encounters a particularly complex section where thousands of threads converge. This is a major historical event forming. Maybe a battle. Maybe a discovery. Maybe someone's about to invent something revolutionary like sliced bread or cryptocurrency. She calls her sisters over, and they confer in low voices that sound like wind through cemetery trees. Runs her fingers over the existing pattern, reading the past that leads to this moment. Skuld hovers her shears near several threads, calculating potential futures. They're having a cosmic editorial meeting about how reality should unfold. And from their frustrated gestures, it's not going smoothly. The actual technique they use would make master weavers weep with envy and confusion. Sometimes they weave over-under like normal fabric. Other times they tie impossible knots that exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Occasionally, Verdandi will pull a thread through itself in a way that violates several laws of physics, but apparently makes perfect sense in fate logic. The pattern that emerges isn't just decorative, it's functional. Each intersection of threads is a moment where lives connect, where decisions create consequences, where the universe's plot advances another paragraph. Here's the part that really messes with your head. The tapestry is infinite but also complete. Every section they weave already exists in potential, but also doesn't exist until they weave it. It's like Schrödinger's cat learned to knit. The Vikings explain this by saying the Norns exist outside time while simultaneously creating it, which is the kind of paradox that probably drove more than one wise man to take up drinking instead. Modern physicists would have a field day with this, except they'd need to invent new math just to describe what they're seeing. The threads themselves carry more than just fate. They carry sensation, emotion, memory. When Verdandi weaves your thread against someone else's, you feel it. That instant connection with a stranger, that inexplicable dislike for someone you just met, that moment when you know, just know, that someone will be important to you. That's your thread recognizing its place in the pattern. The Norns aren't just weaving events. They're weaving the very experience of existence. No pressure, ladies. Sometimes a thread breaks. When this happens, all 3 sisters stop immediately. Examines where it was weak. Verdandi assesses the damage to the present pattern. And Skuld usually already has her shears positioned to cut the thread cleanly. A broken thread can't be repaired. It can only be ended properly or left to fray and tangle others. Most of the time, they choose the clean cut. That's what those sudden, unexpected deaths are. Not cruelty, but cosmic damage control. The Vikings found this oddly comforting, which says something about their general outlook on life. The most unnerving part is watching them handle the gold threads. These are rarer, thicker, and they literally hum with power. These are the threads of kings, heroes, gods, the ones whose choices affect millions of other threads. The sisters handle these with notably more discussion and sighing. The Norns setup suddenly feels familiar, and that's when it hits you. These ladies have cousins. The Greek fates, the Moirai, are basically running the same cosmic business, but with a Mediterranean flair. Clotho spins, Lachesis measures, Atropos cuts. Sound familiar? It's like finding out your favorite local restaurant is actually part of an ancient multinational chain. The Romans called their version the Parsi, because if there's one thing Romans loved more than conquering, it was rebranding Greek stuff with Latin names. But here's where it gets interesting. While the Greek fates are pretty much unchangeable forces of sucks to be you, the Norns have a different vibe. They're not just executing some predetermined script. They're actively maintaining reality like cosmic IT support. When Verdandi stops to untangle a thread snarl, she's basically debugging the universe. The Greeks portrayed fate as this immutable force that even Zeus couldn't override. The Norse? They said fate was three women doing a tremendously complicated job and occasionally having to improvise when someone like Loki does something spectacularly stupid. You notice Erd pulling out what looks like a massive celestial spreadsheet. Okay, it's actually a section of tapestry, but it's organized like a spreadsheet, comparing patterns. She's cross-referencing similar situations across cultures. That time the Greek hero Achilles was dipped in the river Styx. There's a parallel thread here where a Norse hero was given invulnerability. Both have the same weak spot problem because, as Erd mutters, complete invulnerability breaks the narrative structure. The Norns aren't just weaving Norse fate. They're part of some grand cosmic consistency department. The Slavic cultures have their version too, Rojenici, birth fate goddesses who show up in threes because apparently that's the magic number for dealing with destiny. The Celts had the Matres and Matrone, also fond of the triple goddess setup. Even in Lithuanian mythology, you've got Laima decreeing fate. It's like every culture independently decided that fate is women's work, which honestly makes sense. Who else would have the patience for infinite multitasking? But the Norns have this distinctly Norse flavor of resigned practicality, where the Greek fates feel remote and implacable. The Norns come across more like overworked administrators dealing with a cosmos that refuses to follow the manual. They don't do the whole mysterious pronouncement thing. If you asked a Norn about your fate, she'd probably pull out your thread, squint at it, and say something like, "Well, it looks like you're going to have a mediocre Thursday, an unexpected windfall in 3 years, and you should really stop eating gas station sushi." Historians still argue whether all these fate goddess trinities influenced each other, or if humans just naturally assume destiny comes in threes. The Indo-European connection suggests a common origin, some proto-fate goddess that all these cultures inherited and adapted. Or maybe it's just that weaving was women's work across cultures. And when you need a metaphor for creating the fabric of reality, you go with what you know. Either way, the Norns seem to have the most comprehensive job description. The really quirky detail is that unlike their cousins, the Norns have a complaint department. Other mythologies present fate as this distant, untouchable force. But Vikings would literally negotiate with the Norns through rituals and offerings. Not that it often worked. The sisters have been dealing with, "But I don't want to die in battle," requests for millennia, but at least they'd listen. Verdandi occasionally pauses her weaving to cock her head, like she's hearing a prayer, then shrugs and continues. "Sorry, buddy. The pattern demands what the pattern demands. What sets the Norns apart is their workspace. Greek fates, vague cosmic void. The Norns, they've got prime real estate at the base of reality itself, with a magic well and the universe's own tree as a backdrop. It's the difference between working from home and having a corner office in the Cosmos building." Skuld suddenly looks up, the first time you've seen her fully acknowledge anything beyond her work, and stares directly at something you can't see. She's watching a birth, you realize, and her sisters join her in a moment of focused attention. This is the part most people don't know. The 3 Norns at Yggdrasil's base aren't the only Norns. Every single human birth is attended by personal Norns, individual fate weavers who show up like cosmic midwives with attitude problems. These personal Norns are both singular and plural, which makes about as much sense as everything else in Norse mythology. Sometimes it's 1 Norn per person, sometimes 3, sometimes a whole committee if you're destined for something particularly complicated. They arrive at the moment of birth and perform something between a blessing and a sentence. Medieval texts describe them as declaring the child's örlög, literally primal law, which is basically your cosmic terms and conditions that you never get to read, but definitely agreed to by being born. The personal Norns don't look like you'd expect. Forget flowing robes and mystic auras. According to the sagas, they show up looking like whatever makes sense in the context. In a Viking longhouse, they might appear as traveling wise women. In a thrall's hut, perhaps as elderly neighbors who happen to stop by. They're masters of cosmic camouflage, blending into the birth scene while performing universe-altering work. One saga mentions a Norn who arrived disguised as a cat, which raises questions about how exactly a cat pronounces someone's fate, but the Vikings were apparently cool with it. Here's where it gets properly weird. These personal Norns aren't always nice. The Eddas explicitly mention evil Norns who assign harsh fates, and good Norns who grant pleasant ones. It's basically cosmic roulette. You might get the Norn who's in a good mood and grants you prosperity and long life. Or you might get the one who just had a fight with her sisters and decides you're going to have chronically itchy feet and a tendency to fall in love with people who collect ceramic frogs. The Vikings believed this explained why some people seemed blessed while others couldn't catch a break. It all came down to which Norn was on duty when you showed up. The personal Norns' declarations were called Nornir Dómar, the dooms of the Norns. And yes, doom originally just meant judgment, not terrible fate, though given Viking life expectancy, the 2 concepts often overlapped. These declarations were considered absolutely binding. Not even the gods could override a personal Norn's decree, which probably led to some awkward situations when divine favorites got assigned terrible fates. Sorry, Odin. I know he's your chosen warrior, but his Norn says he's going to die choking on a fishbone. Cosmic rules, you understand. The relationship between personal Norns and the big 3 at Yggdrasil is something historians still argue about. Are they extensions of Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld? Independent contractors, cosmic interns gaining experience before moving up to universe-wide fate weaving. The texts are frustratingly vague, probably because the Vikings were too busy with the whole raiding and exploring thing to hold theological conferences about fate, entity, organizational structures. What's particularly fascinating is that personal Norns didn't just assign fate and leave. Some accounts suggest they stick around, invisibly influencing their assigned human's life. That voice in your head telling you not to text your ex could be common sense, could be your personal Norn desperately trying to keep you on track. The Vikings believed these Norns would sometimes manifest at crucial life moments, weddings, battles, deathbeds, to ensure their original pronouncements came true. It's like having a cosmic personal assistant who's really invested in making sure you hit all your predetermined benchmarks. The system seems wildly inefficient. Billions of personal Norns running around micromanaging individual fates while the 3 sisters handle the macro view. But somehow it works. Maybe inefficiency is the point. Maybe fate needs that personal touch, that individual attention to detail that makes your particular thread unique in the vast tapestry. A sudden tension fills the space as footsteps approach. Not the soft padding you'd expect from some minor deity dropping by for a fate consultation, but the purposeful stride of someone used to getting their way. Odin himself emerges from the mist that perpetually shrouds the well's borders, his one eye gleaming with the kind of intensity that makes you grateful you're just an observer here. The All-Father, Mr. I sacrifice myself to myself for wisdom. The god who literally hung from Yggdrasil for 9 days to learn the secrets of the runes, approaches the Norns with all the swagger of someone who's about to be politely put in his place. The sisters don't even look up. Verdandi continues her weaving. Urd sorts through threads with methodical precision, and Skuld tests the edge of her shears against what might be next Tuesday. This is the ultimate power move, when the king of the gods shows up and you treat him like he's the cable guy who's 3 hours late. Odin clears his throat, a sound like distant thunder, and finally Urd acknowledges him with the kind of glance you'd give a particularly persistent telemarketer. The battle tomorrow, Odin begins, and you can hear the weight of command in his voice, the expectation of deference. My Einherjar need to survive. The outcome must... Skuld's laugh cuts him off, sharp as her shears and twice as unsettling. It's not a cruel laugh, exactly. More like the sound you make when a toddler explains how they're definitely going to stay up past bedtime this time. The message is clear. Cute that you think you have input here, one eye. This is the brutal truth of Norse cosmology that even Marvel movies tend to gloss over. The gods are powerful, sure, but they're not in charge. The Norns are. When Odin wants to know the future, he doesn't command it revealed. He asks nicely and pays the price. When Thor wants to change his fate, tough luck, Thunderboy. The Norns wove that story before his grandparents were born. It's a cosmic hierarchy where the CEOs have to answer to the accounting department. And the accounting department is 3 women who've been doing this job since before was invented. The really interesting part is that Odin knows this. He's not here to demand or threaten. He's here to negotiate, maybe to understand. The wisest being in Norse mythology comes to the Norns like a student to particularly strict teachers. He knows things, sure. He has his ravens that fly across the 9 worlds bringing him information. He has his throne that lets him see everything happening in the present. But the Norns, they have the context. They see not just what is, but why it is and what it means in the grand pattern. Verdandi finally speaks, her voice carrying the weight of inevitable truth. The battle unfolds as it must. 17 of your warriors fall, 3 return maimed. The rest survive to fight at Vigrid Field. She doesn't phrase it as a prediction. It's a simple statement of fact, like reading items off a grocery list. Odin's jaw tightens, but he doesn't argue. You don't argue with gravity, and you don't argue with the Norns. But here's the quirky detail that saga writers love to include. Sometimes the Norns drop hints, not direct advice that would break whatever cosmic HR policies they operate under, but little observations. Urd mentions, almost casually, that threads strengthen when woven with loyalty, or patterns repeat unless the shuttle changes direction. It's the kind of cryptic nonsense that sounds useless until suddenly, in the middle of battle, it makes perfect sense. The gods have learned to listen for these hints, to pass the Norns' casual comments like scholars analyzing ancient texts. The power dynamic here is fascinatingly inverted from most mythologies. Greeks had Zeus throwing thunderbolts at anyone who annoyed him. Egyptians had Ra basically running the cosmos like a divine CEO. But the Norse? Their gods are middle management at best. Powerful, but ultimately subordinate to 3 women who never asked for anyone's worship. and definitely don't care about your offerings. Odin's visit has reminded you of something, those runes he's so proud of discovering. The Norns were using them before he was a glimmer in Bor's eye. You notice now that their threads aren't just threads. They're inscribed with tiny runes that shift and change as the sisters work. Each symbol is a word, a concept, a piece of fate encoded in the very fibre of reality. When Verdandi weaves a thread through the pattern, she's literally writing destiny in a language that predates words. The connection between the Norns and runes runs deeper than most people realize. Sure, Odin hung from the world tree and discovered the runes in a fit of self-sacrificial wisdom-seeking. But where did they come from originally? The poems are suspiciously vague about this. But here's the thing. The Norns well is described as having runes carved around its edge. Runes that were already ancient when the gods were young. It's like claiming you discovered mathematics, when really you just finally learned to count what was already there. Skuld pulls out what can only be described as a probability map made of light and shadow. She's consulting it the way you might check GPS, except instead of showing roads, it shows potential futures branching out like a demented decision tree. Each branch is marked with runes that flicker between meanings. Fehu, wealth, might suddenly shift to Rido, journey, as she watches. She's reading the future in real time, and the runes are her user interface for navigating the infinite possibilities of what might be. The divination aspect gets even weirder when you realize the Norns don't predict the future. They literally write it. When a Viking Volva, Ceres, cast runes to divine someone's fate, she wasn't discovering hidden knowledge so much as trying to peek at the Norns' rough draft. It's the difference between predicting the weather and being the weather system itself. The runes were never just an alphabet. They were fate source code, and mortals who learned to read them were essentially script kiddies trying to hack reality. This explains why runic divination in Norse culture was simultaneously respected and feared. You weren't just playing with symbols, you were handling the same tools the Norns used to build existence. Historians still argue whether the Norse believed rune casting could change fate or merely reveal it. But the smart money says both. Reading the runes might show you your fate clearly enough that you could make minor edits, like correcting typos in a document you're not supposed to have access to. The Norns' mastery of runes extends to some genuinely unsettling applications. Occasionally writes runes directly onto threads, not carving or inscribing, but making the thread itself form the shape of the rune. A thread twisted into Tiwa's justice, ensures its bearer will face trial. One shaped like Jera, harvest, guarantees they'll reap what they sow, for better or worse. It's fate programming at its most literal, and it makes you wonder about every weird coincidence in your life. But here's the quirky part that most academic sources skip. The Norns apparently have a sense of humor about their runic work. Sagas mention threads marked with combinations that translate to essentially cosmic puns. A warrior destined to die by tripping over his own sword has threads marked with runes that, when read together, basically spell out, "Watch your step, dummy," in the most elaborate way possible. The Norns are writing the universe's story, and they're not above including dad jokes in the marginalia. The relationship between Norns, runes, and prophecy creates a weird feedback loop in Norse mythology. Odin learned the runes to understand fate, but the runes are the tools fate uses to write itself. It's like trying to understand grammar by studying the ink molecules in a book. No wonder Odin always looks constipated in his statues. He spent eons trying to reverse engineer a system that's simultaneously using him as a component. The daily routine of the Norns makes your typical 9 to 5 look like a vacation. As you watch, Erd rises from her position and walks to the well with a vessel that seems to be carved from crystallized time. It's transparent, but looking through it shows you yesterday instead of what's behind it. She dips it carefully into Erda Brunner, and the water that comes up glows with a soft luminescence that has nothing to do with light and everything to do with pure, distilled causality. This is the part of their job that nobody talks about. The Norns are cosmic janitors, and Yggdrasil is their highest priority maintenance project. The World Tree, for all its majesty and cosmic importance, is still a tree. It needs water, but not just any water. It needs the water from the well of fate, the only substance in existence that can nourish something that exists in all 9 worlds simultaneously. Without this daily watering, Yggdrasil would, well, nobody's really sure what would happen, but the word catastrophic gets thrown around a lot. Verdandi joins her sister, carrying what looks like wool but moves like liquid starlight. This is cosmic gauze, woven from the same threads they use for fate, but treated somehow to be medicinal. Because here's another fun detail. Yggdrasil is constantly under attack. There's a dragon named Nidahugger gnawing at its roots, deer eating its leaves, and an eagle in its crown who spends most of its time talking trash about the dragon. The tree is basically a cosmic apartment complex with the worst tenants ever, and the Norns are the superintendents trying to keep it from falling apart. They work with practiced efficiency, Erd pouring the water, while Verdandi wraps damaged roots with her special thread bandages. Skuld stands guard with her shears, occasionally snipping away what you realize are parasitic fate threads, destinies that try to attach themselves to the world tree to gain power. It's like cosmic weeding. If weeds could alter reality and had ambitions of apotheosis, one particularly aggressive thread tries to wrap around Skuld's wrist, and she casually snips it into non-existence with the same energy you'd use to flick away a mosquito. The water from the well does more than just hydrate. It preserves. Where it touches Yggdrasil's bark, old wounds seal, damaged sections regenerate, and the wood takes on a lustrous quality that suggests health in dimensions you can't quite perceive. The tree responds to their ministrations like a pet being groomed, its branches shifting slightly to give them better access, its roots lifting to accept the healing water. It's weirdly domestic for a scene involving the fundamental structure of reality. But the Norns' maintenance goes beyond just physical care. They're constantly adjusting the tree's metaphysical balance. Yggdrasil doesn't just connect the 9 worlds, it holds them in proper relation to each other. When Verdandi notices one branch drooping, probably Midgard, humans are exhausting. She doesn't just prop it up, she adjusts the fate threads around it, redistributing cosmic weight so the branch naturally returns to its proper position. They're simultaneously arborists, engineers, and reality technicians. The really bizarre part is that this maintenance is preventive for something that's already happened, is happening, and will happen. Yggdrasil exists across all time simultaneously, so the Norns are treating wounds from future battles, reinforcing branches that will bear weight in the past, and generally performing maintenance on a tree that experiences all of history as now. Historians still argue whether this makes their job easier or infinitely more complicated. The answer is probably yes. Sometimes other beings try to help. The stags who eat Yggdrasil's leaves claim they're pruning. Ratatoska, the messenger squirrel who runs up and down the trunk, insists he's performing vital communication services. The Norns treat these helpers with the patient resignation of professionals dealing with enthusiastic amateurs. When Ratatoska scurries past with another insulting message between the eagle and dragon, Verdandi doesn't even look up from her work. She just extends one thread slightly, causing the squirrel to take a path that avoids the section she just repaired. The gender dynamics here are impossible to ignore. In a mythology dominated by barrel-chested gods swinging hammers and axes, ultimate power rests with 3 women doing textile work. This isn't an accident. It's a deliberate statement about where real power lies in the Norse cosmos. While Odin and Thor are out having dramatic adventures that would make great movie franchises, the Norns are quietly doing the actual work of keeping existence functional. The Norse word for fate, word, is grammatically feminine, and this runs deeper than linguistic coincidence. The entire concept of destiny in Norse culture is inherently female-coded. Men might wage wars and sail seas, but women wove. In every Viking household, women controlled the vertical loom, creating the cloth that kept their families warm, that served as currency, that marked status and wealth. The metaphor was too perfect to ignore. If women wove the fabric of society, why wouldn't they weave the fabric of reality itself? This connects to a broader pattern in Norse society, where women held specific types of power that men couldn't access. The Völar, seeresses, were exclusively female. Seda, the most powerful form of Norse magic, was considered fundamentally feminine, so much so that Odin practicing it was seen as controversial, even shameful. The message was clear. Men might rule the visible world, but women controlled the invisible forces that actually mattered. The Norns are just this principle taken to its logical cosmic extreme. What makes this even more interesting is that the Norns' power isn't portrayed as nurturing or gentle. It's absolute and uncaring. They're not mother figures. They're administrators of existence who happen to be female. When Skuld cuts a thread, she doesn't weep for the life ending. When Urd assigns a harsh fate, she doesn't apologize. They embody a kind of female power that exists outside masculine frameworks entirely, neither in opposition to male power nor derived from it, but simply beyond it. The textile metaphor runs even deeper when you consider Viking material culture. The most prestigious gift a warrior could receive wasn't a weapon. It was a banner woven by noble women, believed to carry fate-altering properties. Ship sails, woven by women, were thought to catch not just wind, but destiny itself. Every piece of cloth was a miniature version of the Norns' work, a human echo of cosmic weaving. Women at their looms weren't just making textiles. They were participating in the same fundamental act that kept the universe running. Historians still argue whether this female control over fate reflected actual social power or was a compensatory fantasy in a patriarchal society. The answer is probably both. Viking women had more rights than many of their European contemporaries. They could own property, initiate divorce, run households, and conduct business. But they were still excluded from formal political power, from the thing, assembly, from most forms of public decision-making. The Norns might represent both what women actually did, the invisible work that kept society functional, and what they could do if social constraints didn't exist. The quirky detail that really drives this home. In some regional variations of Norse mythology, the Norns have assistants, all female, naturally. These lesser Norns, lowercase intentional, handle specific types of fate: Norns of battle, Norns of childbirth, Norns of the harvest. It's essentially a cosmic corporation run entirely by women, with departments and specializations, and probably the universe's most interesting coffee breaks. So I was weaving this king's fate yesterday, and would you believe he tried to sacrifice his way out of it? Men, am I right? This gendered division of cosmic labor creates some deliciously awkward moments in the mythology. When Thor needs his hammer fixed, he goes to the dwarves. When he needs to know if he'll survive using it, he has to humble himself before female powers he can't threaten or fight. The Norns represent a kind of authority that exists completely outside the warrior culture's value system. You can't defeat fate in single combat, and offering it mead won't make it like you better. Skuld suddenly stands, her movements sharp with purpose, and for the first time you see her face clearly beneath the hood. It's simultaneously young and ancient, beautiful and terrible, with eyes that hold the weight of every ending that ever was or will be. She's looking at something in the distance, and when you follow her gaze, you see it. A section of the tapestry that glows with an ominous red light, threads converging in a pattern that makes your stomach drop, even though you don't understand what it means. This is Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, and it's not some distant possibility. It's woven right into the fabric of reality, like a scheduled maintenance shutdown for the universe. The Norns didn't decide this would happen. They simply wove what must be woven. And what must be woven includes the end of everything. It's the ultimate expression of Norse fatalism. Even the gods who rule the cosmos are subject to a fate they can see coming but cannot avoid. The pattern is intricate and horrifying. You can trace the threads. There's Odin's, thick and golden, running strong until it suddenly terminates in a wolf's jaws. Thor's thread, crackling with barely contained thunder, ends in a mutual destruction with the world serpent. Heimdall and Loki, their threads so tangled together they're practically one rope, both ending at the exact same point. The Norns wove this apocalypse with the same dispassionate care they use for everything else. It's not personal, it's just the job. What's really unsettling is that the gods know this. They can presumably visit the Norns, see this section of tapestry, read their own doom spelled out in thread and fate. Yet they continue playing their roles, preparing for a battle they know they'll lose. It's either the ultimate expression of courage or the cosmos's worst case of predestination paralysis. Historians still argue whether the Norse saw this as heroic acceptance or cosmic tragedy. The answer, like most things involving Vikings, is probably both, with more alcohol. Verdandi runs her fingers along the Ragnarok section, and you notice something interesting. The pattern doesn't end with the apocalypse. There are threads that continue past it, new patterns emerging from the ashes of the old. Some threads that seem to end actually continue, transformed. 2 human survivors hidden in Yggdrasil's trunk, new gods born from the ashes of the old, the sun's daughter taking her mother's place. Ragnarok isn't an ending. It's a cosmic semicolon, the universe's way of saying, wait, there's more. The Norns' role in Ragnarok is particularly twisted. They're not causing it. They're simply weaving what was always going to be woven. It's like being the court reporter at your own trial. They'll survive it, of course. Whatever else Ragnarok destroys, it can't destroy fate itself. The Norns will sit by their well, weaving reality back together with the patience of cosmic customer service representatives dealing with the universe's most dramatic reboot. But here's the detail that makes it all wonderfully weird. The Norns seem bored by Ragnarok, while gods and giants prepare for their ultimate battle, while prophets speak in hushed tones of the coming doom. The Norns treat it like any other section of tapestry, Erd occasionally glances at it with the expression of someone checking a calendar for a dentist appointment. They're not looking forward to, but also not particularly worried about. They've woven billions of endings. What's one more? Even if it includes everyone they work with? The predetermined nature of Ragnarok raises all sorts of philosophical problems that Viking skalds probably discussed over mead. If the gods know they're doomed, why do they keep making the choices that lead to their doom? Why does Odin keep collecting warriors for a battle he knows he'll lose? Why does Loki proceed with the actions that will lead to his binding and eventual mutual destruction with Heimdall? The Norns offer no answers, just the steady click, click, click of fate being woven exactly as it must be. You turn from the cosmic tapestry to find Erd examining something that makes your historically inclined heart skip, a physical object from Midgard, the human world. It's a small stone with runes carved deep into its surface, worn smooth by countless hands. This is a piece of archaeological evidence that somehow made its way to the Norns' workplace, probably through some offering ritual or burial practice that actually worked. The Vikings left us frustratingly little direct evidence of Norn worship, but what we have is telling. Runestones occasionally invoke the Norns, usually in context of hoping for good fate or accepting bad fate. The formula, "May the Norns grant good fortune," appears often enough that historians think it was a standard blessing, like a cosmic fingers crossed. But the really interesting stuff comes from the sagas, where Norn worship gets weird in that distinctly Viking way. There's the story of the temple at Uppsala, where apparently a section was dedicated to the Norns. Not a whole temple. They had to share space with Odin, Thor, and Freya, probably because even Vikings knew better than to give fate weavers their own building. The rituals described are sparse on details, but heavy on textile imagery. Women would bring their finest weaving to leave as offerings. The logic being that if you're going to bribe reality's administrators, you might as well speak their language. Archaeological digs have found what might be Norn-related artifacts, though proving it is like trying to identify someone from their shadow. Spindle whorls carved with runes that spell out fate-related words. Loom weights buried in patterns of 3. A silver pendant from Östergötland that shows 3 women around what might be a well, though it could also be 3 women around literally anything circular. The Norns didn't go in for obvious branding, no I Heart's Fate merchandise for these ladies. The most intriguing evidence comes from boat burials. Several high-status Viking graves included looms among the grave goods, positioned in ways that suggest ritual significance rather than just, "She'll need this in the afterlife." One spectacular find in Norway included a loom with thread still on it, forming a pattern that textile archaeologists say was impossible to complete, deliberately impossible. Like the weaver was trying to create a physical representation of unfinished fate. But here's the quirky bit. The Vikings seem to have a love-hate relationship with their fate weavers. Saga characters complain about the Norns the way we complain about traffic or Wi-Fi, constantly, creatively, and with the assumption that they're probably listening and definitely don't care. "The Norns have woven me an ill fate" was apparently the Viking equivalent of FML. Except with the understanding that the cosmic forces ruining your day were 3 women who literally couldn't care less about your problems. Personal objects invoking the Norns tend toward the practical. Combs with runic inscriptions asking for good fate regarding hair. Seriously, because if you're going to have your fate woven, might as well request manageable hair while you're at it. Weapons rarely invoke the Norns directly, Warriors preferred gods who might actually help in battle, rather than entities who'd already decided the outcome before you lifted your sword. The absence of evidence is almost as telling as its presence. No grand Norn statues, no elaborate temples, no standardized prayers or hymns that survived. It's as if the Vikings understood that you don't worship fate. You acknowledge it, you work with it, you occasionally curse it, but you don't pretend it cares about your offerings. The Norns were less deities to be appeased, and more cosmic facts to be dealt with. The Christian conversion added another layer of complexity. Missionaries trying to explain free will to people who believed 3 women had already woven their entire lives must have had some interesting theological discussions. Some syncretic texts try to equate the Norns with angels or saints, which is hilarious when you consider that the Norns' whole thing is being answerable to nobody, including any monotheistic deity who might have opinions about predestination. The threads on the loom suddenly shimmer with an oddly familiar quality, and you realize you're looking at patterns that exist in your own time. The Norns' influence didn't end with the Viking Age. It evolved, adapted, and snuck into modern culture like a fate virus that refuses to be quarantined by something as trivial as the passage of millennia. Start with the obvious. Every fantasy novel with a prophecy, every movie where someone tries to change their fate, every video game with a destiny mechanic, they're all echoing the Norns' greatest hit. Your fate is already woven, but feel free to struggle. J.R.R. Tolkien. That crafty professor basically smuggled Norse cosmology into Middle-earth. His whole Doom of Mandos thing, that's the Norns with a scholarship to Oxford. George R.R. Martin's three-eyed raven seeing all of time. Sounds like someone's been reading about wells of fate, but it goes deeper than fantasy literature. The concept of the red thread of fate in East Asian cultures parallels the Norns' thread so closely, it makes you wonder if there's some deep human need to imagine destiny as textile work. Dating apps trying to find your perfect match through algorithms are basically attempting to mechanize what the Norns do, weaving compatible threads together, minus the cosmic authority, and with significantly more awkward coffee dates. Modern paganism has resurrected the Norns with a vengeance. Neo-Norse practitioners invoke them in rituals, usually with a better understanding of their role than the Hollywood Vikings who wear too much eyeliner and not enough clothes. These modern worshippers tend to focus on the Norns as symbols of accepting fate while maintaining agency, a philosophical balance that would probably make Verdandi nod approvingly while continuing her work. The really weird part is how the Norns show up in psychology. Carl Jung wrote about the fates as archetypal representations of the unconscious processes that shape our lives. Modern therapists talk about rewriting your narrative and taking control of your story, which is essentially trying to grab your thread from the Norns and do some DIY weaving. The entire self-help industry is basically one long argument with Skuld about whether that future she's holding is negotiable. Video games have embraced the Norns with enthusiasm. From God of War's interpretation, where they're surprisingly accurate to the source material, to countless RPGs where fate weavers appear as quest givers or final bosses. The gaming industry has figured out what the Vikings knew. There's something deeply satisfying about the idea that your story is important enough to be woven into the cosmic tapestry, even if you can't change the ending. But here's the unexpected place the Norns surface. Corporate buzzword bingo. Threading the needle. Weaving partnerships. Fabric of the organization. Business speak is drowning in textile metaphors that trace back to the idea of fate as something woven. Every time a CEO talks about the company's destiny, they're unconsciously invoking 3 Norse women who would find quarterly earnings reports cosmically irrelevant. The Norns have even infiltrated science. Chaos theory, with its emphasis on how tiny initial conditions create vast consequences, is basically a mathematical expression of how the Norns work. That butterfly in Brazil causing a tornado in Texas, that's just Vedandi's thread work playing out in meteorological form. Quantum physicists talking about probability clouds and collapsed wave functions might as well be describing Skuld's view of the future before she makes her cuts. Social media algorithms, those invisible forces that determine what you see, who you meet, what influences your decisions, are the closest thing we've created to actual Norns. They're weaving our digital fates, creating connections and consequences we don't fully understand. The main difference is that the Norns presumably know what they're doing, while Silicon Valley is basically throwing spaghetti code at the wall and seeing what sticks to the fabric of society. The persistence of the Norns in modern culture suggests something profound. We need them. We need the idea that our chaotic lives are part of some greater pattern, that someone or something is keeping track of the threads. Whether that's comforting or terrifying probably depends on what kind of day you're having. Vedandi pauses in her weaving and looks directly at you. Actually at you. Not through you or around you, but at the thread that represents your existence in this moment of reading these words. The philosophical weight of this moment hits like a Norse hammer to the cerebellum. If the Norns weave fate, and you're reading about the Norns, and this moment was always woven to happen, well, congratulations. You've just experienced the Nordic version of a recursive loop error. The free will versus predestination debate in Norse thought makes modern philosophical arguments look like playground disputes. The Vikings lived with a paradox that would break most logical systems. Everything is predetermined by the Norns, but you're still responsible for your actions. Your fate is woven, but you must live it with courage. The outcome is fixed, but the quality of how you meet it matters. It's like being told the ending of a movie, but still being judged on your performance as an actor. This creates what scholars call Norse fatalism, though that term misses the nuance entirely. It's not passive acceptance, it's active engagement with inevitability. Think of it like this. If you knew you were going to die in battle tomorrow because a Norn told you, and they're annoyingly accurate, you don't stay in bed. You sharpen your sword. You feast with your friends. You make that death mean something. The Vikings understood that predestination doesn't eliminate meaning. It creates it. The Norns embody this paradox perfectly. They weave fate, but the threads fight back. Remember that unruly strand Verdandi struggled with. They determine outcomes, but not always methods. They set the destination, but the journey, that's where whatever freedom exists lives. It's like cosmic GPS. The endpoint is fixed, but you can still choose your route, and sometimes the scenic path makes all the difference. This philosophical framework creates some brain-melting scenarios. Consider Odin. Who knows from prophecy that he'll die at Ragnarok, swallowed by Fenrir? Does he stay home? No. He spends eons preparing for that battle, gathering warriors, seeking wisdom, making alliances. Why? Because in Norse thought, how you meet your fate matters more than the fate itself. The Norns wove his ending, but they left the middle chapters for him to write. Historians still argue whether the Norse truly believed in this level of predestination, or if it was more of a philosophical framework for understanding life's uncertainties. The answer probably varied by individual, like asking modern people if they really believe their horoscope. Some Vikings probably saw the Norns as absolute authorities, others as metaphorical representations of cause and effect, and still others as something to blame when things went wrong. The quirky detail that really bakes your noodle. If the Norns weave everything, did they weave their own existence? Are they self-causing entities? Or is there some even more fundamental force that wove the weavers? Norse texts are suspiciously silent on this point, possibly because even Vikings had limits to how much existential vertigo they could handle. The Norns simply are, which is either deeply profound or the mythological equivalent of, because I said so. This plays out in everyday Viking ethics in fascinating ways. Murder someone? Well, that was fated. But you still pay the blood price. Make a terrible trade. The Norns wove it, but your reputation still suffers. It's a worldview that manages to be both completely deterministic and entirely focused on personal responsibility. The philosophical gymnastics required to maintain this balance would earn gold medals at the Cognitive Dissonance Olympics. Modern neuroscience accidentally supports this Norse view in uncomfortable ways. Our brains make decisions before we're consciously aware of them. Our genetics, environment, and neural chemistry shape our choices in ways we don't fully control. We're basically biological threads being woven by forces we don't understand, but we still experience the illusion of choice. The Vikings might have been onto something with their fate is real, but act like it isn't philosophy. The scene around the Well of Fate begins to shimmer, and you realize your time observing the Norns is drawing to a close. But before you go, Skull does something unexpected. She holds up a thread, your thread, and shows you something that makes your breath catch. It's not your future, exactly, but the quality of the weave itself, where your thread intersects with others, where it strengthens or frays, where it carries the most tension. She's showing you not what will happen, but how you're connected to everything else. This is the ultimate teaching of the Norns. You're not a separate entity experiencing fate. You're part of fate itself. Every choice you make, every person you meet, every consequence you create, it's all part of the vast tapestry they weave. The Vikings understood this implicitly. Their concept of weird wasn't just personal destiny. It was the recognition that all fates are interwoven, that what affects one thread affects the pattern. Meeting your personal Norns, really understanding what the Vikings meant by this, isn't about finding 3 women who'll tell you your future. It's about recognizing the forces that shape your life, the patterns that repeat, the threads that connect you to everything else. Your personal Norns are the confluence of genetics, circumstances, choices, and chance that make you who you are. They're the voice that says, "This feels right," or "Something's about to change." Their pattern recognition elevated to a spiritual practice. The Vikings would say your Norns are always present, always weaving, whether you acknowledge them or not. That recurring life pattern you can't seem to break. That's your personal Norns following their established weaving pattern. That sudden opportunity that seems to come from nowhere. They've been setting up that thread intersection for years. The friend who appears exactly when you need them. Thank the Norns for their collaborative weaving project. But here's what makes the Norse view radical even today. It suggests your fate isn't separate from you. It is you. You're not a puppet dancing to the Norns' strings. You're a thread in their tapestry, simultaneously woven and weaving. Every action you take is both predetermined and free, both fated and chosen. It's a view that collapses the dichotomy between fate and free will into something more complex and ultimately more honest about how life actually feels. The practical application of this worldview is surprisingly modern. Accept what you cannot change, the warped threads of your fate, but work skillfully with what you can influence, the weft of your choices. Recognize patterns without becoming enslaved to them. Understand that everyone else is equally woven into this cosmic tapestry, so treating them poorly is like deliberately creating snags in the fabric of reality. Your personal Norns might manifest as intuition, as synchronicity, as that strange feeling that you're exactly where you need to be even when life is difficult. They're the part of you that knows things without knowing how you know them. The Vikings would say this is your thread recognizing its place in the pattern, your individual fate harmonizing with the cosmic weave as you step back from the well, leaving the three sisters to their eternal work. You carry with you the understanding that every moment of your life is both written and being written. The Norns have woven your presence here, reading these words, thinking these thoughts. But what you do with this knowledge, that's where your thread shows its true quality. The water of the well reflects one last image as you depart. Millions upon millions of threads, all different colors and textures, weaving together in patterns of impossible complexity and beauty. Somewhere in that vast tapestry is your thread, connected to others in ways you'll never fully understand. The Norns continue their work, patient and eternal, weaving reality one choice, one moment, one life at a time. As the mists close around the scene, you hear the steady rhythm of their work continuing, click, 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 the sound of existence being woven exactly as it must be, exactly as it is, exactly as you're living it right now. And so we come to the gentle end of our journey tonight, where the sound of cosmic weaving fades into the quiet rhythm of your own breathing. The image of those three eternal sisters begins to soften and blur, like an ancient tapestry seen through half-closed eyes, their endless work continuing somewhere beyond the veil of sleep. You've walked with gods and glimpsed the threads of existence, but now it's time to let go of these grand mysteries and return to the simple, mortal comfort of rest. The Norns are still there, of course. They always were, and always will be, patient and eternal at their loom, weaving tomorrow while you dream. But their work no longer needs your witness. Your thread is safe in their ancient hands, woven exactly where it needs to be, carrying you exactly where you need to go. The well of fate reflects nothing now but starlight and silence. The great tree Yggdrasil sways gently in cosmic winds you can no longer feel. And somewhere, in that space between sleeping and waking, you might still hear it, the soft click, click, click of destiny being woven, steady as a heartbeat, gentle as rain on leaves. But that sound too fades now, replaced by the deeper rhythm of your own peaceful breathing. Your story continues. Of course it must, for the Norns have woven it so. But for tonight, for these quiet hours, you can rest. Let the threads of your day loosen and relax. Let tomorrow's patterns wait unknowable in Skull's hidden hands. For now, in this moment that Verdandi weaves with special care, there is nothing required of you but rest. The cosmos will still be there when you wake. The great tapestry will continue growing. But tonight, dear dreamer, tonight you can simply let go and drift into the gentle darkness, where even fate pauses its endless work. Sleep well, carried by threads of story into dreams of your own making. The Norns smile their knowing smiles and return to their work. And you finally rest.